Today, we are going to look at a totally new way to understand one of the most mysterious parts of our minds, our attention. We usually think of it as this spotlight that we can aim wherever we want. But what if it's not like that at all? What if it's more like a current in a river?
All right, let's start with something we've all felt, that struggle to just focus. You know that feeling where your mind just absolutely refuses to stay put and it's jumping from one thing to the next?
I mean, does this sound familiar? You're trying to get some work done and bam, suddenly you're thinking about what to make for dinner. Then you're remembering some random conversation from years ago, and then a song just pops into your head out of nowhere. It can feel, well, completely random, like you're watching some bizarre movie with no director.
Now, this quote here, this is from a real dream analysis. Just look at how disjointed it is. It's strange. It jumps between these scenes with zero warning. It feels totally random, right? Well, believe it or not, the secret to understanding our own wandering attention when we're awake is actually hidden right inside the weirdness of this dream. So how in the world do we make sense of all this mental chaos? Well, there's a new framework from cognitive science called the Brain Kinematics Model, or BKM for short, and it gives us a completely different way to picture what's going on inside our heads. So, the model kicks off with this really powerful idea. Your mind is never doing just one thing. At any given moment, it is managing a whole bunch of parallel activities, even when you're not consciously aware of most of them.
And if you think about it, we do this all the time, don't we? You can be listening to a friend talk, but you're also planning what you're going to say next, or you're riding a bike and at the same time you're thinking about your day. Our brains are natural multitaskers, keeping all these different streams of thought, sensation, and action going at once.
Okay, so the BKM gives these activities a pretty technical-sounding name, parallel strain flows. I know, it sounds complicated, but just picture them as competing currents in a river. Every thought, every feeling, every sensation you have, it's its own current, and they're all flowing at the same time, constantly fighting to be the dominant one. So, if our brain is this big river of competing currents, what does that make attention? For decades, we've pictured it as that spotlight we can point wherever we want. But this model? It suggests something completely different.
So what decides which current wins this constant competition? Well, according to this model, it all comes down to two key things. First, you've got amplitude. You can think of this as the raw power or the intensity of that stream. And second, there's coherence, which is basically how stable and organized that stream is. A really powerful but chaotic stream might actually lose out to one that's a bit weaker, but is perfectly steady.
And this leads us to a pretty radical new definition of attention. It is not some tool that we actively control. Instead, attention is simply the result of this competition. It's just the name we give to whichever stream of thought or sensation happens to be the strongest and the most stable in any given moment.
Okay, let's circle back to that really bizarre dream from the beginning, because this is where the model really just clicks. It gives us this brilliant way to decode what was actually going on.
So when we look at the dream through this BKM lens, all those chaotic jumps suddenly make perfect sense. That feeling of isolation in the hall, that's a stable, low-energy stream. Then, the mind needs to release some tension, so attention flows to a relaxation stream, the kids and the cats. The argument over debubbling, who knows what that means, but it's a completely different stream taking over, one with high energy, high stability, all focused on language. Each jump isn't random at all. It's just our attention flowing to the next dominant current.
So the huge insight here is that the chaotic movie of the dream isn't random in the slightest. It's actually a map of the brain's internal energy, showing our focus shifting from one current to another as it's constantly trying to find a state of balance.
And this model isn't just for decoding weird dreams. Nope. It gives us an incredible way to understand our entire mental landscape while we're awake, in our daily lives.
Let's just apply this to 3 states of mind we've all been in. You know that feeling of being in the zone? That's deep concentration. It's when one stream becomes so powerful and stable it just drowns out everything else. And what about mind wandering? Well, that's the total opposite. A bunch of weak, unstable streams just drifting around with no clear winner. And that moment an emotion just hijacks your focus, that's just an emotional stream suddenly getting a huge burst of power.
This really shows us the mechanical difference between a flow state and just spacing out. And the key isn't willpower, it's the physics of your mental energy. Deep focus, that flow state, that's what happens when one stream has both high power and high stability. Mind wandering is what you get when lots of different streams all have low power and low stability. Nothing is strong enough to really take charge.
So, what is the big takeaway here? What does this new way of looking at attention really mean for us in our day-to-day lives?
Maybe the most powerful idea from this whole model is this. When your focus shifts, it is not a personal failure. It's not a character flaw. It's not a sign of weakness. It is simply the natural, healthy balancing act of your brain's incredibly complex system. It's a feature, not a bug.
This quote from the research sums it up so beautifully. Attention acts as the visible crest of a deeper wave field of competing cortical strain energies. In other words, what we call attention is just the very tip of a vast, hidden ocean of competing energies inside our brain. And our conscious experience? That's just the surface of that ocean, always constantly seeking balance.
Thinking this way kind of reframes everything, from how we think about being productive to how we practice mindfulness. It suggests that instead of fighting to control a spotlight, maybe our real goal should be to act more like a river guide, creating the conditions, inside and out, that encourage the right currents to grow stronger. So I'll leave you with this question to chew on. If your attention is a current, not a switch, where do you want your mind to flow?